Have you ever wondered how a man could terrorize an entire state for over a decade and then vanish, as if swallowed by the earth? Between 1974 and 1986, California lived in fear. A predator who stalked the night, creeping into homes while families slept. At first, they called him the East Area Rapist. Later, the original Night Stalker. But long after the crime stopped, a chilling realization came to light. They were the same man. A man who raped over 50 women, murdered at least 13 people, left hundreds paralyzed by fear, and for more than 40 years, his identity remained a mystery. Until DNA cracked the case, unveiling a name no one expected: Joseph James DeAngelo. Tonight, we're not just revisiting the crimes, we're diving deep into the mind of the Golden State Killer, who he was, how he evaded justice for so long, and what his case reveals about the power and limits of forensic science. Before we begin, let me ask you, what makes a seemingly ordinary man hide a monster inside? To understand the monster, we must first understand the man. Joseph James DeAngelo was born in 1945 in Bath, New York. From the outside, he was just another boy growing up in post-war America. But inside the DeAngelo household, darkness was already taking root. His father, a Army sergeant, was reportedly abusive both physically and emotionally. Family members recalled Joseph witnessing his sister being assaulted by another soldier while his father stood by. Trauma wasn't just part of his childhood, it was woven into his earliest memories. When the family moved to California, Joseph seemed to find stability. He joined the Navy, served in Vietnam, then pursued a degree in criminal justice. Ironically, he trained to uphold the very laws he would later shatter. By 1973, he became a police officer in Exeter, California. But behind the badge, something sinister was growing. In 1974, a string of burglaries began across Visalia, a town not far from where DeAngelo patrolled. The Visalia ransacker broke into over 120 homes, stealing trivial items, wedding rings, small keepsakes, women's underwear. Yet he left behind an unmistakable message. No one was safe, not even in their own homes, though never officially linked at the time. Many now believe DeAngelo was the ransacker. His fascination with control, his obsession with invading private spaces, it was all there in those early crimes. But it didn't stop at theft. In 1975, a homeowner named Claude Snelling was shot and killed while trying to stop the abduction of his daughter. The stakes had escalated. Violence had entered the equation. And just as the crimes turned deadly, the ransacker vanished. Why did he stop? He didn't. He simply evolved. By 1976, a new predator emerged 40 miles away in Sacramento. The police called him the East Area Rapist. His methods were chillingly familiar. Break-ins at night, stalking suburban neighborhoods, tying up victims, whispering threats in the dark. But this time, the crimes were more brutal, more calculated. The escalation was clear. The burglar had become a rapist, and soon, a killer, all while Joseph DeAngelo continued his day job as an officer in Auburn Police Department. He investigated burglaries, responded to domestic disputes, even lectured citizens about protecting their homes. No one suspected that the man preaching safety was the very man who stole it. How does a man live such a double life? How does he compartmentalize the monster inside? That's the terrifying paradox of Joseph DeAngelo, a man who wore the mask of authority while feeding an uncontrollable hunger for dominance and fear. And for California, this was just the beginning. At first, it seemed random, but by the late 1970s, a pattern had emerged. The East Area Rapist wasn't just targeting homes, he was targeting entire communities. Neighborhoods once known for their safety were suddenly shrouded in fear. People double-locked their doors. Men slept with baseball bats by their beds. Families installed security systems, something rare at the time. In Sacramento's suburbs, a curfew wasn't officially declared, but no one dared stay out late. Joseph DeAngelo wasn't just committing crimes. He was altering the collective psyche of California. His method was terrifyingly methodical. He would stalk his victims for days, sometimes weeks, learning their routines, finding their vulnerabilities. Then, in the dead of night, he'd strike. He'd break in while couples slept, shine a flashlight into their eyes, waking them with a whisper, "Don't move, don't scream." He tied up husbands, placed dishes on their backs. "If I hear a sound, if these plates fall, you die." Then he led the wives to another room. These weren't impulsive acts. They were rituals of control. Psychologists later described his behavior as a classic manifestation of power reassurance rapist typology, a criminal driven not just by sexual desire, but by a deep-seated need to dominate and humiliate. Every step of his crime reinforced a fantasy where he was in complete command. And the taunts didn't end with the victims. He called their homes days after, whispered threats, left obscene messages. Sometimes, he called the police themselves, challenging them, mocking their failure to catch him. Despite hundreds of leads, despite task forces formed across counties, the East Area rapist always seemed one step ahead. His crime spread south into Contra Costa, Stockton, Modesto. Then, abruptly, he disappeared. But in 1979, he resurfaced under a new name, the original Night Stalker. Now, he wasn't just breaking into rape. He was breaking into kill. Between 1979 and 1986, a string of brutal murders haunted Southern California. Couples bludgeoned in their beds. No forced entry. No witnesses. The police didn't connect these murders to the rapes in Northern California, not yet. It wasn't until decades later that DNA evidence revealed the chilling truth. The East Area rapist and the original Night Stalker were the same man. One man. Multiple names. Spanning hundreds of miles. A predator who evolved his crimes with terrifying precision. And all the while, Joseph DeAngelo lived a seemingly ordinary life, married, raising children, working retail after being fired from the police. The question lingered. How does someone compartmentalize such darkness and return home to mow the lawn, kiss his kids goodnight? Perhaps that's the most haunting part of all. For decades, the Golden State Killer was a phantom. By the 1990s, his crimes had faded from headlines. Cold case files gathered dust. Survivors tried to rebuild their lives, but fear lingered. Many believed he was dead or simply gone forever. But the truth was more unsettling. He was still there, living quietly in Citrus Heights, California, just another retiree tending his garden. The breakthrough came not from old-fashioned detective work, but from the frontier of science. In 2018, investigators uploaded DNA from crime scenes into GEDmatch, an open-source genealogy database, not to find DeAngelo directly, but to locate distant relatives. Piece by piece, a genetic family tree took shape. A distant cousin, a great-grandparent, until one name stood at the end, Joseph James DeAngelo. It was a revolutionary moment. For the first time, genetic genealogy had solved a major serial crime, a blend of biology, data science, and relentless investigation. But there was something almost poetic in the irony. A man who had evaded traditional detective work for 40 years was undone by a tiny biological trace he couldn't control. On April 24, 2018, officers arrested DeAngelo outside his home. The once feared predator, reduced to an old man in sweatpants, rolling garbage bins to the curb. Inside his house, police found a life frozen in mundanity. Family photos, a recliner, cereal boxes, no hidden lair, no trophies. Just an ordinary home hiding in extraordinary darkness. When confronted, DeAngelo whispered, "I did all those things. I didn't have the strength to push him out. He made me. He went with me." Some experts saw this as a final act of manipulation, a way to distance himself from guilt, blaming an inner demon instead of facing the horror of his choices. In 2020, DeAngelo pleaded guilty to 13 counts of murder, 13 counts of kidnapping, and dozens of rapes. At his sentencing, survivors faced him in court. Some forgave, others condemned, but all reclaimed their voices. For many, the trial wasn't just justice, it was closure, proof that even the most cunning predator can be unmasked. That silence doesn't mean escape. That time doesn't erase truth. But a deeper question remained. Why did Joseph DeAngelo, a man with a family, a job, a home, choose to inflict such terror? Was it about power, control, a compulsion he couldn't resist? Or something darker, something even he couldn't fully understand? Perhaps we'll never know. But the Golden State Killer story isn't just about crime. It's about science catching up to evil, about the limits of identity, about the shadows hiding behind the most ordinary faces. In the end, Joseph DeAngelo wasn't a shadowy figure in a mask. He wasn't a monster lurking in the dark. He was a man, a neighbor, a father, a husband. And maybe that's what makes his story so unsettling. We like to believe that evil announces itself, that predators wear warning signs. But DeAngelo reminds us, sometimes the face of horror is painfully ordinary. He mowed his lawn, shopped for groceries, shared dinner with family, all while hiding secrets that spanned decades. His capture was a victory for science, for persistence, for the survivors who never stopped hoping. But it also left an uncomfortable truth. If he could walk among us unnoticed, how many others still do? That's the haunting legacy of the Golden State Killer. Not just the crimes, but the reminder that darkness doesn't always hide in shadows. Sometimes it smiles at us from across the street. As we close this chapter, I want to honor the strength of every survivor who spoke out. Their courage turned whispers into testimony, pain into power, and I invite you to reflect, how well do we truly know the people around us? What signs might we miss, not because we're blind, but because we're not looking? If you found this deep dive meaningful, consider subscribing for more explorations into the human psyche, the mysteries of crime, and the stories that shape our understanding of justice. And I'd love to hear your thoughts. What stood out to you most in D'Angelo's story? Do you believe someone like him is born or made? Leave a comment below. Let's continue the conversation. Until next time, stay curious, stay thoughtful, and stay safe.